Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
James and Cindy quickly left the suburbs. They could still hear the sound of sirens as they sped towards the abandoned factory. The two of them quickly arrived at a large road. James stood by the side of the road and stopped for a while before finally hailing a pickup truck. But the kind-hearted owner said that there were no seats left in the truck and could only let them sit in the bed. He was very nice and even took out a clean blanket for them to sit on. In the back of the truck, Cindy laid on James's body. Whether it was her voluptuous figure or the softness of her chest, she was constantly making James's heart rate. Fortunately, Cindy wasn't deliberately teasing James. Otherwise, James really couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't act on his feelings on the spot. When the sky started to lighten, the pickup truck finally arrived back in London. In the morning wind of London before dawn, James held Cindy's hand and said goodbye to the kind-hearted driver. James once again threw himself into the embrace of the city. He hurriedly took out his phone and called Edward. He had to admit that this new phone was really tough. After a night of torture, it still worked normally. As soon as the call connected, he could hear Edward's anxious voice. He directly asked a long string of questions, making James not know how to answer. "Hello, Mr. Tucker. I'm so glad you finally called. How are you? Are you safe? Did you save your friend? They didn't hurt you or your friends, did they?" Edward, it's me. I'm James. It's nothing big. We're safe now. Don't worry," James said. "Oh, that's great. It seems that you got lucky. This is really good news. I'll tell everyone immediately," Edward said excitedly on the other end of the phone. After that, James reported his location. Edward was a man who did things swiftly and decisively. In no time at all, arriving at James's place to pick them up. "Oh, Mr. Tucker, it's so wonderful to see you again. You're okay. Your friends were worried sick." Edward got out of the car and gave James a warm hug. To Edward, all of this was simply unheard of. Because of the rumors he had heard about the Black Bat Society on the internet, no one who fell into their hands had come out alive. He'd never thought that James, who came from overseas, would come back, and he'd also brought his friend back safe and sound. This was simply unbelievable. He noticed some injuries on James's arms and back, and his eyes immediately widened. He understood that this man must have experienced something extraordinary last night. "Oh, Mr. Tucker, you don't look too good. Do you want me to send you to the hospital first?" Edward pointed at the wounds on James's arm. Those were scratches caused by some gravel and shrapnel after the grenade exploded last night. Although it looked scary, they were actually just superficial wounds. "That's okay. I'm fine," James waved his hand and said. Then he pulled Cindy's hand and sat in the back of the car. This scene stunned Edward. He used his finger to draw a 3 and then stretched out a finger to make a 1. Then he put his two hands together and formed a 4. He frowned and said, "This guy, how can he be so popular with women? How did he do it? He's really awesome." Edward sat in the driver's seat with an envious look and quickly brought them to his home. This was a middle-class residential area in London. It was obvious that Edward was doing quite well to be able to own a house here. However, he was only a middle-class person. Compared to James, who was a billion-dollar tycoon, he naturally couldn't compare at all. When they got out of the car, Krista, Vanessa, Katie, and Professor West were already waiting there. "Mr. Tucker!" Vanessa rushed up to James as soon as she saw him get out of the car. "James!" "Sir." Katie and Krista also rushed forward. The three of them were worried about James and didn't sleep the entire night. When they saw their man come back, they immediately rushed over to take care of him. However, when Vanessa saw James holding Cindy's hand and didn't let go after getting out of the car, the smile on her face instantly froze. Katie and Krista's expressions also changed. When James saw this, he felt a little scared and tried to pull his hand out of Cindy's. But at this moment, the seemingly gentle Cindy suddenly put out a powerful vibe. She firmly grabbed onto James's hand that he was trying to pull away, and her eyes eyes instantly locked onto Vanessa's. She then met the gazes of Katie and Krista. She faced the three of them alone, and her power was fully unleashed. She didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all. Her confidence actually shocked James. He'd always thought that Cindy would just be such a gentlewoman. He had to admit that she really was a strong, confident force to be reckoned with. The gazes of the four people collided in the void. James could even feel the electric currents flowing between them all. The jealousy could be felt as well. James's face was full of distress. This was only the first exchange of blows, and it was already this bad. He estimated that when the four women boarded the ship, it would be really bad for him. Vanessa had a fiery temper and was about to attack when she was pulled back by Krista. She pulled her to the side and whispered a few words. She didn't know what to say, and it actually made her quiet down. James never dared underestimate Krista's wisdom. Even if he had the power now, he didn't dare. "Cindy, are you all right?" Professor West had rushed forward and asked Cindy with concern after this short confrontation between the women. "I'm fine," Cindy said to Professor West with a smile. When everyone saw that she was okay, they all heaved a sigh of relief. Professor West held James's hand with both hands and thanked him profusely. However, after the kidnapping of Cindy, Professor West and his entire team had completely lost their sense of security. They really didn't want to stay here any longer. They wanted to immediately take everyone and Cindy back to the country. No matter how enthusiastic Edward and James tried to persuade them to stay for a few more days, they were unwilling. However, at this moment, Cindy announced a piece of news that was shocking to everyone except for James. Cindy looked at Professor West and said, "Sir, you guys can go back. I'm staying here for now. In the future, I'll follow James and the others and travel around the world." Everyone looked at Cindy in unison. They were all shocked. The three women who had been staring at her suddenly widened their eyes when they heard this. All of them had expressions of disbelief. Vanessa even put her hands on her hips and angrily walked up to Cindy to argue, but she was held back again by Krista. Although Krista was also very surprised that Cindy would say such a thing, she was a smart person. She knew that there were too many other people here right now, so it wasn't the time to ask Mr. Tucker. She also noticed that when Cindy said this, it seemed like James didn't object. Did this mean that this was also his intention? Not only that, but she also had to act normally in front of so many people. But the gazes of the three women instantly became sharper when they looked at Cindy. If their gazes could cut, then Cindy would be covered in scrapes and bruises right now. Professor West seemed to have just recovered from Cindy's shocking news. He hurriedly said, "Cindy, what did you say? You're not going back?" "Yes." Cindy looked at Professor West once again and nodded with certainty. Then she said slowly, "I'm not going back with you, Professor. I'm going to travel around the world with James and the others." "Ah." Professor West was surprised. He waved his hand and said, No. When you went abroad, your father told me to take good care of you. Now if I don't bring you back personally, how will I explain it to him?" "Yes, that's right." At this moment, Clark also quickly agreed. He'd always secretly liked Cindy. When he heard that Cindy actually wanted to travel around the world with another man, he obviously wasn't thrilled. However, Cindy also said with a solemn expression, "Professor, I've already made my decision. You don't have to say any more. I've already made up my mind. As for my father, I'll call him myself and I'll explain it to him. You don't have to worry about that. I'll handle everything." After Professor West heard Cindy's words, he froze on the spot. However, Cindy was an adult after all, and she could make her own decisions. If she wasn't willing to go back, he wouldn't force her to. Besides, this young man called James seemed to be very trustworthy. It was actually much safer for Cindy to be with him than following the group. After pausing for a moment, Professor West sighed. It's really hard to tell a grown woman what to do. He suddenly thought of his daughter. Then he looked at James and said meaningfully, "James, The Yarrows only have Cindy. If she chooses to travel around the world with you, I can't force her to go back, so I hope you can take care of her." "Don't worry, Professor West. She'll be fine with us," James said with a smile. The two of them shook hands. Professor West left with his team and went straight to the London International Airport. "James!" As soon as Professor West left, Vanessa exploded. She rushed over and looked like she wanted to hit him. Katie also rushed over. Only Krista was still considered rational. She stood where she was, but her gaze looked like she was going to eat Cindy alive. Vanessa and Katie rushed forward at the same time and punched his arm. It hurt so much that James immediately bared his teeth and cried out, "Ouch, that hurts!" Krista walked over with her hands on her hips. Her anger was palpable, and she stared at Cindy with obvious hostility. She didn't know what kind of means that girl used, but clearly it was James who allowed her to stay. Although they didn't know what he was thinking, when a newcomer came, they still had to welcome her, just like when she boarded the ship after that. However, Cindy didn't have the time to respond to Krista's threatening gaze at the moment. She hugged James, gave him a fierce kiss on the cheek, and slapped away Katie's and Vanessa's hands. She said, "I like James. It was I who took the initiative to stay. It's none of his business, and I won't change in the future. I like him, so if you want to find trouble, come at me. Don't hurt him. He deserves our protection." After Cindy finished speaking, she stood in front of James and blocked his path. She truly was unstoppable. James was shocked, and his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Cindy's direct declaration of war instantly caused the three women to explode, especially Vanessa. Not only was she hot-headed, but she was also a level 9 Taekwondo expert. She was someone who could use real weapons. She immediately took a stance and grinned at Krista and Katie. "Krista? Katie? You guys rest. Let me handle this." She didn't wait for the two to speak and turned to Cindy and said, "If you want to share our man, it will depend on whether or not you have the ability. Taekwondo black belt level 9. Do you understand?" James saw that they were about to fight, immediately pulled Cindy away and said, "Vanessa, if you have something to say it." In any case, he was a man. He wouldn't hide behind Cindy and let her support him. That wouldn't be right. "Go away. It's none of your business." However, Vanessa didn't buy it at all and snorted. James was about to give in and look for a more reliable way to reconcile when Cindy pulled him away and said, "James, what she said is right. This is a war between us women. It has nothing to do with you." Just like that, James was put in his place by the two women. However, just as James was overwhelmed with anxiety and had no idea what to do, Edward, who had been watching from the side, gave James a big thumbs up and said, "Man, you were chosen by 4 women at the same time. You're so lucky." He finally understood that these 4 women, regardless of their looks or intelligence, were all very fond of him. They also didn't seem to mind sharing him with others. This was simply too good to be true, and it made him extremely envious. But James stared at him dumbfounded. He wanted to say to Edward, "Dude, don't you see? I'm in big trouble right now. Couldn't you have chosen another time to praise me?" Cindy pushed James aside. James was a little worried about her. After all, she'd been kidnapped last night. Now that Vanessa had forced him to do so, he was more inclined to protect her. No matter what, she was still a newcomer. At the very least, he had to protect the newcomer. He needed to persuade Cindy not to be impulsive and then persuade Vanessa not to continue. Otherwise, it would cause a huge issue later. James saw Cindy squat down on both knees and put her arms together. She actually wanted to fight Vanessa, who had already gotten into a Taekwondo pose. This was a big problem. She was actually in a very powerful close combat position. Vanessa grinned and said, "Since you started practicing Kung Fu when you were 8, you were ready to take me on." James was full of questions. What did this mean? Why were all these women so powerful? James had always felt that they were beautiful and intelligent, but now he also felt that they had incredible strength. Even Krista and Katie didn't expect the soft and weak Cindy would actually have practiced kung fu since she was a child. Of course, no matter how good a woman's technique was, it was still unable to match the assassin's strength. That was why Cindy was kidnapped. So you're a martial arts practitioner. Interesting. Vanessa looked at Cindy with great interest. Then the two women rushed forward and started fighting. The strength between them actually made cracking sounds. However, this was really hard for James to watch. His eyes kept shifting left to right to watch. He was worried Vanessa or Cindy would get hurt. The two women were his darlings. His heart ached for them. But the key was that he couldn't say it now. Vanessa had been with him through so much, and now so had Cindy. He was so full of worry, and his head hurt. Just then, James saw Krista giving him a look. She closed her eyes and pretended to faint. James instantly understood what she meant. He knew that Krista was helping him, so he gave her a thumbs up. Among these women, she was really special. James did as she suggested and covered his stomach with both hands. With an ah sound, he fell down in pain. Krista, who had wanted to help him, immediately rushed forward and shouted anxiously, "What's wrong? Are you okay? Are you hurt? Why is there so much blood? Oh my God, are you all right?" Krista had wanted to help James get out of this predicament, so she deliberately spoke in a loud voice, and there was even a hint of desperation in it. "James." Katie also saw that James had fainted, so she immediately rushed over. Her face was full of anxiety. "James, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me." Katie was the weakest among the four women, and James was the most important person to her now. She was lost in her thoughts. "James, Mr. Tucker." Seeing James fall to the ground in pain, the two women naturally couldn't continue fighting. Both of them immediately rushed over. The entire scene instantly quieted down. This once again shocked Edward. He had no idea what had just happened. Wasn't it just a moment ago when the four women were in a heated argument? Why did they stop all of a sudden? There was a long wound on James's back, but it didn't hurt. He didn't expect that at this moment the wound would actually come in handy. Seeing the concern in the eyes of the four women, James immediately pointed to his back with a painful expression. Krista cooperated and lifted his shirt, revealing the wound. "Oh no, this looks really bad." The women all started crying. Even Krista, who had just wanted to help James, felt her heart skip a beat. This man was their heart now. Although the wound was on James's body, it had hurt their hearts. "James, how did you get hurt?" Vanessa asked with trembling hands. "Do you feel any pain?" Katie also moved her soft lips closer to the wound and kept blowing gently on it. "I'm fine," James said with a painful expression. "James, didn't you say that your injuries weren't serious? I told you to follow me to the hospital first, but you refused to listen. Look at your injury," Cindy said with an irritated look in her eyes. The moment she spoke, the three other women all looked at her at the same time. Vanessa was a straightforward person. She pointed at Cindy and said, "It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, James wouldn't have gotten hurt. You've brought bad luck on us. Why do we have to meet a disaster like you? If it wasn't for you, we would have continued our beautiful journey around the world. This is all because of you." Vanessa's words made Cindy feel terrible. James's injuries were indeed because of her. "Vanessa, don't say that about Cindy," James said to Vanessa. "James, you were injured because of her, yet you still stand up for her?" Vanessa said with tears in her eyes. James saw that she was about to explode again. He immediately cried out, "Ouch, it hurts. It hurts so much." Vanessa instantly became nervous. She no longer had the time to deal with Cindy. The other three women also had nervous expressions. Edward walked over and said, "Ladies, I see that Mr. Tucker's injuries are serious. Let's send him to the hospital now." "Yes, to the hospital," Vanessa and Katie quickly said. But Krista waved her hand and said, "You can't send him to the hospital." "Why not?" Vanessa asked. Cindy said the words that should have been said by Krista. Because of some things that happened last night, if we send James to the hospital now, it's very likely that there will be an issue with the police. Although we're the victims and don't have any specific responsibility, we're not locals. Once we're involved with the police, it could turn into a nightmare. Just as she finished speaking, Krista turned her head to look at her and nodded. She's right. Her eyes revealed a sense of understanding and wisdom. She really didn't expect that Cindy was so similar to her. She was really smart.